All right. Proverbs chapter 1. I want to say a few things about quitting, giving up, God giving up on us giving up on God. This whole concept of just can't take it anymore. We just quit. A lot of Christians think that because they are Christians, that they are, try to envision a maze. And you put a little mouse in a maze, and a maze, goes through, and depending on how smart or how complicated the maze is going to take the rat X number of minutes to get from one point to another. And a lot of Christians, without maybe consciously thinking of it in these terms, they think that their life is basically, once they get saved, God has a predetermined job for them or a course for them to take for their lives. God sticks them down in the middle of this maze, and they have to work their way through. And whatever happens, happens. Whatever course it takes, and they have no say about it. But we do have. God, with the concept of free will, I can't even begin to express how important the concept of free will is. It can be the greatest thing that ever happened to you, or it can be the worst thing that you can ever dream of. Free will. You as a Christian, you as a person, not just a Christian, anybody, you literally have the ability to stand on your 2 feet, look up to God, and say, "Phooey on you." Now, what's God going to do in response to that? Well, he could kill you. He could turn you into a leper. He could send you to an immediate hell. There's a lot of options that he has by virtue of his job description. But most of the time he doesn't. He'll just keep giving us rope. Just keep giving us rope until we can hang ourselves. I'm going to give a couple of verses just to lay the foundation that we, with the capacity of free will, when I say we, I'm talking about people in general, not just Christians, anybody. We have free will. A couple of verses. First one, Proverbs chapter 1, verse 24. This is God speaking. And it says, "Because I have called, and ye refused, I have stretched out my hand, and no man regarded." That's God speaking. I've called, you refused. I stretched out my hand, and no one regarded it. Now, in his capacity as God, obviously, he has the power that when he calls, you're going to come. When he stretches out your hand, you're going to acknowledge it. Obviously, he has that power by virtue of being God. But he does not choose to exercise it in that fashion all the time. They can refuse. They can ignore him. Matthew chapter 23. They're scary type verses. When you figure that you have the capacity to just tell God to go take a flying leap at himself. Now, in the end, it's not going to work out real good for you, but you can do it. Matthew chapter 23. Verse 37. "O Jerusalem, Jerusalem, thou that killest the prophets, and stonest them which are sent unto thee, how often would I have gathered thy children together, even as a hen gathereth her chickens under her wings, and ye would not. God said, how often would I have gathered your kids together and protected them like a hen, chicken does with their little chicks? But ye would not. That's free will. Now we're going to slide into the purpose of this whole thing. God will open doors for you. God will close doors for you. But in the end, you have to walk through the door, or you have to not walk through the door. It's a conscious decision on your part. We have to be sharp enough to figure out what we should do sometimes. And for that, we go to Proverbs chapter 3. Proverbs chapter 3. This is probably, in my estimation, one of the greatest passages in all the Bible, because it explains so many things. Proverbs chapter 3, verse 5. Trust in the Lord. Can't go wrong there. With all thine heart. Now that's a little bit more difficult. Yeah, Lord, I'll trust you with my finances, but to give 10%? I'm barely squeaking by with 100%, and now you want me to take 10% and give it to you? I'm not sure about that. Trust in the Lord. Yeah, okay. With all thine heart. That's a whole different level. And lean not unto thine own understanding. Because we all have an opinion. We all have an agenda. We all think we know what's right. We all think we know what's on the other side of the door. I mean, we're all adults as such. We all have lived, X number of years. We all have a body of experience. We know what's going on. So why shouldn't I trust my own understanding? God says, don't do it. Trust in the Lord with all thine heart, and lean not unto thine own understanding. In all thy ways, acknowledge him. And he'll do what? He shall direct thy path. The way I usually take biblical or spiritual concepts and I try to put them for myself into terms that I can relate to. I can't relate to a holy God, and I'm not holy. I'm not sinless. I'm not perfect. I can't relate to him on that level. I can't relate to God as far as his power, omniscience, and so forth. I can barely walk from point A to point B. I can't relate to a being who commands the universe, who sustains the universe by the power of his voice. I can't relate on that level to him. So I try to take spiritual concepts and break them down for me. I see a series of doors. Let's say there's 3 doors. And I'm standing here, and I know I've got to get to the other side. I've got to take one of these doors. I don't know which door to take. They all look the same. They all look just as inviting. Maybe I have a preference for left hand or right hand. But at the end of the day, I just don't know which one to take. Because once I get on the other side, it's going to be different depending on which door I took. It's not like I walk through a door and I'm in this room, or I walk through a door over here and I'm in this room, or I walk through a door in the middle and I'm in this room. No, the biggie is that once I go through that door, the whole world on the other side is different depending on which door I take. So now how do I make that decision? Because I don't know what's on the other side. All my understanding, he says, lean not unto thine own understanding. All my understanding doesn't help me with trying to figure out what's on the other side, because I can't see into the future. I can't tell what's coming down the road. If I make this decision here, I don't know what the ramifications are. If I knock that domino over here, I don't know what the effect is because of that. So I say, Lord, there's 3 of them out there. I can't figure it out. I don't know which one. I leave it up to you. And he's not necessarily going to overtly tell me which door to go through, but I know from experience that he will show me in his own way. It might be a feeling that I have. It might be an ease of getting to that door and opening the knob. It might be a million other variations. But at the end of the day, as long as I have said to him, Lord, I can't figure it out, I leave it in your hands. At that point, I firmly believe it makes no difference which of those 3 doors I take. I have completed, and I am now in the middle of the will of God. Why? Because I picked the right door? No, that's got nothing to do with it. It's the fact that I acknowledged him, did not lean to my own understanding. I gave it over to him. So at that point, any door I take is perfect. Whatever is behind that door could be 3 totally different scenarios. It doesn't make any difference. When I have acknowledged him, when I have let him be God, and I say, Lord, I'm going to start walking, whichever one I hit, that's the one I'm going through. He says, go for it. And when I get on the other side, it doesn't make any difference. I am in the perfect will of God. If I took door 1, perfect will of God. If I took door 2, perfect will of God. If I took door 3, perfect will of God. Why? Not because the doors are the same. It's because I acknowledged him. And in the acknowledging of him and not leaning to my own understanding, every single door is going to be perfect. Perseverance, not giving up. What if David had given up? You know the story of David? He was approximately 16 years old. 14, 15, 16, someplace in there. When Samuel anointed him as king of Israel, Saul had blown it. Saul was a complete disappointment to God. He looked good, charismatic, people loved him. He was just the best thing that could have ever happened to Israel. He turned out to be a miserable flop. And so now God's looking around for somebody to replace him. He picks on David. Says to Samuel, you go anoint him king. Samuel comes, pours the oil on his head, pronounces him king of Israel. And at that moment, he is king of Israel as far as God is concerned. Saul is still sitting on the throne for another 15 years or so. But in God's mind, David is now king. And you remember the story, okay? He is anointed. He is technically king, but he doesn't sit on the throne yet. The whole story of Goliath comes up. He kills Goliath. Saul makes him the big part of his household. He brings him into the inner circle, into the inner court. He's a great guy and so forth. And then him and Saul have a falling out. And David has to literally flee for his life. And now he's hiding in caves. He's out into the wilderness. He's in the deserts. He's living with the Philistines, the arch enemy of Israel. He is working for the Philistines as a mercenary. I mean, he's really off the rails here at this point. There's a 14-year plus or minus period of time of which, as king, he's not recognized as king. Do you realize that there's 150 Psalms? Do you realize in none of them does he ever bitch and gripe about the fact that he was made king and yet he didn't sit on the throne? He's sitting in a cave one time, and he's thirsty, and he's afraid to go out of the door of the cave to the well out there because the Philistines, and Saul rather, at that point, are trying to kill him. So he says, who's going to go get water for me? And some of his aides, his buddies, his generals, or, the guys in his army say, we'll go get the water for you. And so he allows that to happen. He is in big, big emotional problems here. He's a basket case. But he never griped, he never bitched about the fact that God didn't immediately after the anointing and the proclamation of him being king, he didn't get the throne. I would have bitched every single day. You made me king, and I'm sitting here in a cave. You made me king, and I'm having to have my buddies go get water for me. You made me king. I don't have anything to eat over here. You made me king. I can hear the scenario with me in that same situation right now. I could write that book easy. David didn't. "14 years. At the end of it, you know what he writes? Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me." Are you joking? Do you realize where he's writing this from? Do you realize the political situation he's in? Do you realize the family situation that he's in? Do you realize the whole totality of the mess? For thou art with me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. My cup runneth over. What's he smoking? This is incredible. But this shows the difference of someone who trusts God, period, or someone who just goes through life looking for the things that God is going to do for him to say, oh yeah, God is on my side. Oh yes, I'm in the will of God because I got this, or because that happened, or because I was lucky here. And so we judge our relationship with God based on the things around us. Some people don't. Some people, like David, did not judge his relationship with God based on the things that were happening in his life. He based his relationship on God on what God said. Period. What if John Mark had a quit? Everybody says, who is John Mark? Never heard of John Mark. John Mark, as in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. He wrote the second gospel. As a young man, he had an opportunity to go with Paul and Barnabas on a missionary journey. Both these guys, Paul and Barnabas, seasoned missionaries, seasoned preachers, seasoned Christians, and so forth. And John Mark, I'll just refer to him as Mark now, he's just a young kid out there, young preacher boy. First assignment. He goes out with them. The going gets tough. Something happens, and he quits. He leaves Paul Barnabas in the dust, he goes back to Jerusalem. Look over in Acts chapter 15. Acts chapter 15. So after this fiasco, there comes a time when Paul and Barnabas are going to go out on another missionary journey. And so they're getting all the arrangements made, booking the reservations on the boats and so forth, and making sure they have lodging, and there are people there to greet them when they come into town and so forth. They're doing all the prep work stuff. And in the course of this conversation, to getting all the prep work done and getting the agenda and the itinerary all worked out, Barnabas says to Paul, "Oh, let's bring Mark with us again." Acts chapter 15, beginning at verse 36. And some days after Paul said unto Barnabas, "Let us go again and visit our brethren in every city where we have preached the word of the Lord, and see how they do." And Barnabas determined to take with them John, whose surname was Mark. Paul says, "Let's go visit all those churches that we were at before." Barnabas says, "Great, let's take Mark." Oops. Verse 38, but Paul thought not good to take him with them, who departed from them, from Pamphylia, and went not with them to the work. So in other words, something happened on that first missionary journey when they did take Mark with them. Mark quit. Now in the second missionary journey, Barnabas wants to take Mark again. Paul says, "No way. Forget it. He bailed on us once. I don't trust him. He's not coming." Verse 39, and the contention was so sharp between them that they departed asunder one from the other. So Barnabas took Mark and sailed unto Cyprus. And Paul chose Silas and departed, so forth. The fight between Paul and Barnabas was so bad that they split. And they didn't have fellowship for years and years and years. That split was so severe. Well, what was the big deal? What was Paul all hyped up about? Acts chapter 13. Just back a couple of pages. Acts 13. Verse 13. Acts 13:13. Now, when Paul and his company loosed from Paphos and came to Perga, to Pamphylia, and John, departing from them, returned to Jerusalem. So something happened in these towns. The going got tough. I don't know if they were being stoned. I don't know if they were being beaten, thrown in prison. Something happened, and John Mark bailed on them. He said, "I can't take it anymore. I quit." And off he goes. What if Paul himself had have quit? You remember the story? He was the greatest persecutor of Christians in his era. He had the authority. He had the political standing. He had the brains. He was Christianity's greatest enemy. He had people killed, thrown in prison, families ripped apart. He was a piece of work. And you remember, on his way to Damascus, God met him. Jesus met him, literally, physically met him. And Paul becomes converted. "Lord, what wilt thou have me to do?" Jesus says, you go into the city, into a street called Straight, and you sit there on your butt for 3 days, I'll tell you what you're going to do. Paul's converted instantaneously. And he's at God's beck and call. In Paul's mind, I'm not really sure what he thought Christianity was going to bring for him. I don't know that he thought that he was going to end up as a missionary, going to foreign lands and foreign cities and so forth and establishing churches. I don't know if in his mind he thought there would come a day where his letters to these various churches that he established would become what we refer to as the epistles, letters that are incorporated into the New Testament. He probably didn't have any of this in mind on that day that he's laying on the ground, looking up at Jesus saying, Lord, what would thou have me to do? He had no idea. We know from behind the scenes in the next chapter when God is talking to Ananias and says, hey, this is my chosen vessel. This is my guy. I'm going to show him what great things he must suffer. Well, Paul probably didn't know that part of the conversation. All he knew, he was a Christian. He's at God's disposal. 14 years. Gee, isn't it amazing? 14 years with David, hiding in the wilderness, hiding in caves. Promised the throne. Doesn't have the throne. 14 years. Paul is a Christian. No other Christians, says, except Peter and James, would give him the time of day. 14 years as a Christian. He was ostracized. Nobody invited him to come in to preach. Nobody said, oh, Paul, oh, you're the one that met Jesus on the road to Damascus. You saw him in the flesh that day. Come, tell us what that was like. What did he look like? How tall was he? What was his demeanor? What did he sound like? Did he have an accent? Blah, blah, blah. Come and tell us, Paul. Nobody, not a word. Paul, tell us about the 3 years that you spent with Jesus, literally in the flesh, in the Arabian desert. And he taught you all this stuff that you incorporated into the epistles. Tell us, what was that like? Nobody asked him anything. They couldn't care less. He was shunned because of his past behavior to the church. Nobody asked him, oh, here's Brother Paul out in the congregation. Paul, why don't you stand and give us a testimony of what it was like to be stoned outside the city gates of Lystra, left for dead, having been caught up into third heaven to the very throne of God itself, and speaking with God on his throne, and then God sending you back to earth. Paul, tell us about that, will you? Nothing. 14 years, complete, utter, ostracized from the church. Couldn't care less. Tell us about your sufferings. Tell us about all these things. 2 Corinthians chapter 11. 2 Corinthians 11. Beginning in verse 24. This passage here that I'm going to read, this is Paul doing a brief recitation of the junk that he had to endure as a Christian. And the only reason he's putting this in here is because of all the people, the Corinthian church was the worst in acknowledging Paul as an apostle. Because as I said, he was ostracized for 14 years. Nobody wanted to have anything to do with him. As a Christian, 14 years. And so when he referred to himself as an apostle, most of the churches said, forget it. There's no way you're an apostle. The apostles were the guys who walked with Jesus, broke bread with him, saw him every day, listened to the Sermon on the Mount and all this kind of stuff. You weren't even in there. You were still lost. You were still persecuting Christians for years after that thing. And now you have the effrontery, you have the to refer to yourself as an apostle. And so Paul was constantly trying to defend himself to these people. And he has to do it again here. He's not bragging in that sense. Verse 24. 2 Corinthians chapter 11. Of the Jews. Another little dig. The Jews, 5 times received I 40 stripes save one. That's 39 whips. 5 times. Scar tissue on scar tissue on scar tissue on scar tissue. Nerve damage after nerve damage after nerve damage. 5 times he had to endure this. Thrice, 3 times, was I beaten with rods. Once was I stoned. I was outside the gates of Lystra. He was dead. He was killed. God took him up, spoke to him, brought him back down, said, your ministry is not finished yet. I've still got more work for you to do. 3 times I suffered shipwreck. A night and a day have I been in the deep. Do you realize that's a 24-hour period? Treading water out in the middle of the ocean, in the Mediterranean. No land, no islands, no nothing. He's in deep water 24 hours. Just treading that water. Trying to keep afloat. You think all these things didn't do something to him psychologically, emotionally? You think he didn't have a chip on his shoulder when some nobody type Christian comes up and dares to challenge him on his authority of being a Christian? I mean, some idiot that just sat there in a pew for 80 years and did nothing for Jesus, except get through from week to week to week to week. And this guy's challenging Paul? And Paul, he's lost it right here. Verse 26. In journeyings often, perils of water, perils of robbers, perils by mine own countrymen, perils by the heathen, in perils in the cities, in perils in the wilderness, in perils in the sea, in perils among false brethren, in weariness, painfulness. Who signs up for this? Oh yeah, come to Jesus, everything's going to be just hunky-dory. Come to Jesus, your life will be just a bowl of cherries. Come to Jesus, everything's going to be streets of gold for you. Little clouds with angels strumming harps. Just come to Jesus. That's why I get so angry when I hear these preachers that just preach this mantra. Come to Jesus and all your problems will be solved. Are you nuts? Have you read your Bible? In weariness, painfulness, watchings often, hunger, thirst, fastings often, in cold and nakedness. Besides all those things which are without, that which cometh upon me daily, the care of all the churches. Who is weak? And I am not weak? Who is offended? And I burn not? If I must needs glory, I will glory of the things which concern mine infirmities. I'm not going to brag about the churches that I established. I'm not going to brag about the thousands, hundreds of thousands of Christians that I brought into the church. I'm not going to brag about the miracles. You want the proof of my ministry? You want the proof that I'm an apostle? Here it is. The whippings, the beatings, the stripes, the water, jail time. He just listed it all. That is my proof of being a Christian. You want to stand up next to me and compare scars? You want to stand up to me and compare broken bones? You want to stand up to me and compare jail time? What if Paul had quit? Oh, God doesn't love me. Here I am. I'm in jail again. I'm not out there preaching the gospel and bringing glory to God. No, I'm in jail again. Oh, God doesn't love me anymore. Oh, no, here comes another whipping, Paul. You just had 3. Your back is, for all intents and purposes, just totally shot nerve-wise, scar-wise. Here comes another one. Oh, God, you're not going to ask me to endure this pain again, are you? I've already gone through it 3 times. And now we're on to a 4th, and there's maybe a 5th coming down the road. God, where are you when I really need you? He could have gone that route. He didn't. What route did he take? 2 Timothy chapter 4. This is the end of his life. He's in Rome. Nero's on the throne. He's approximately 65 years old. He's been a Christian for maybe 35 years or so. He's been condemned to death. He's to be executed by beheading. Verse 6. For I am now ready to be offered, and the time of my departure is at hand. I have fought a good fight. I have finished my course. I have kept the faith. Henceforth, there is laid up for me a crown of righteousness. We all have a choice. When things get tough, we can either quit. We can find reasons to not go through with it. We can find reasons to go to plan B. When things grow tough, we can take the position that, well, God is trying to tell me something. He doesn't want me to do this. How many times do you think maybe Paul had the idea, based on circumstance, that God didn't want him to establish churches? Maybe he had another job for Paul. Do you think Satan ever got inside of his head? You call yourself a Christian. Look what God's allowing to happen to you. You call yourself a Christian. And God allows all this bad stuff to happen to you? You must have done something wrong, Paul. You must be on the wrong track here. If you weren't on the wrong track, God wouldn't let all this bad stuff happen to you. Have you ever heard that little voice in your head? I'm sure Paul heard it every day of his life. But he did not quit. I have kept the faith. I have fought a good fight. I have kept the course. I have finished what he gave me to do. Henceforth, there is laid up for me a crown of righteousness. Heavenly Father, spiritual things such as this, it's really hard for us to get, because by nature we are not hardwired to think spiritually. We are so prone to react physically and emotionally and psychologically. We feel pain. something hurts, something doesn't work, we relate to this stuff. When we want to go to point A and the road is blocked, well, are you trying to tell us that you don't want us to go to point A, or are we supposed to go to point B? It gets confusing. And then the devil jumps in and he adds to that confusion. And sometimes we don't know which door to take. Sometimes we don't know which decision to make. Sometimes we don't know what to do in these circumstances. But Father, you did give us the answer. And I started out with that thing today, the first verse. Trust in the Lord. Lean not unto thine own understanding. In all thy ways acknowledge him, and he shall direct thy path. And if we have that mindset, Father, I believe with all my heart, as I just said to these folks, that regardless if we take door number 1, door number 2, or door number 3, as long as we have acknowledged you before we turn that knob, it doesn't make any difference which door we end up in. We are in the perfect will of God. Lord, help us to get to that point where we can trust you. Not our understanding, not the way we think things should be, not reading the reactions of things around us, the circumstances of which we're bound in, but to get out from under those, to get above them, and to seek your will, and to trust you. Father, give us that grace. I pray in Jesus' name.